in most cases, hiring a clone is your worst answer.
Yes.
You really want a puzzle piece, as you're describing. Somebody that's going to come in and fit, but add to the picture, right? And so they do need to fit like a puzzle piece, but we are expanding the picture as we add that puzzle piece. They can't be the puzzle piece that's way out over here, and we don't have anything even close to connecting it to yet. They've got to be, in that next joining spot to be useful. And so that does make any particular delegation a bit of a unicorn hunt, but there's probably more puzzle pieces that fit than you think.
Are you feeling overwhelmed, stuck, or uncertain about how to grow your business without sacrificing what really matters most? Welcome to The Business You Really Want, the show for women ready to build a sustainable, fully aligned business. Aligned with what, you ask? You, your values, your life. Seriously, it is possible. I'm Tonya Kubo, and along with business advisor extraordinaire Gwen Bortner, we're here to show you how. Have you found that hiring people sometimes, maybe all the time, creates more work instead of less? If so, you're not alone. That is an experience that I personally have had, and it is not fun. Can we just agree? It is absolutely positively not fun. And so today, Gwen and I are here to talk about why most delegation fails. And I'm not saying it's not because you hired the wrong people, but I'm also not saying it's not because you didn't hire the wrong people. It may just be because what you were looking for is not exactly what you needed. So if you're new here, I am Tonya Kubo. This is Gwen Bortner. And we are going to be talking about a recent kind of breakthrough in my own understanding related to delegation and how we have found a way to lighten your load instead of actually adding to it. So Gwen, we're going to kick this off with you because you were the person who about a year ago said, hey, Tonya, I think maybe, just maybe, we should outsource some of the marketing tasks around here, right? Because I had been doing end-to-end marketing, everything from strategy to concept to writing to follow-up to measurement. And Gwen, you were like, maybe you shouldn't do all those things, Tonya. I don't know. Like maybe we should find some help. And I said, no, Gwen, this is the only way it can be done. We're recording the episode because I've changed my mind. But before we get to that, Gwen, why don't you talk about things from your perspective?
Well, so the first thing that struck me is if I'm hiring you as a CMO, why am I also hiring you as a content producer? Because I consider those two different levels of work. Not that they're both not valuable, but they're different levels of work. And why am I also hiring you? I mean, early on, we finally got some of this off your plate, but also like really doing administrative work as part.
I'm really not good at that, by the way. If you're listening, just know that is not my gift at life.
Don't ever actually hire her for that. She's not good at
that.
No. She's lovely, but that's not her. But you were doing all of that end-to-end piece. And I am the first person on the planet who will say, you have to be careful when you're hiring, 15 different specialists, each working only a couple hours a week, because what you've done there, although you may have really efficient people doing very efficient things, the communication between all those people becomes so complex, you're probably losing efficiency in communication. And I know, because we had talked a lot about this, that your thought process was, by me doing all of these things, my communication process is super, super straightforward because it all happens in my head. I don't have to communicate with anybody else, which there is validity in that. I'm not saying it's not true, because there is absolutely true validity in that situation. It's like, yes, when it's all in my head, it happens really, really fast.
Yes.
And the miscommunication is very, very rare. maybe not at all, but there's probably even some in our heads that we miscommunicate to ourselves. So that was my first thought. But what I was also seeing is, and I couldn't put the name to it until after we got past it and we talked about it. But when you said it, it was like, yes, that was exactly what I was sensing. But like I said, I couldn't quite put a name to it, which was that you were spinning in some of the areas more than you needed to spin because both brains were trying to do the thing at the same time. Your strategic brain and your tactical brain were both trying to function at the same time. And as your tactical brain was going, your strategic brain was like, no, 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 no. Don't forget about this. Oh, and think about that. And what about this other thing? And then when your strategic brain was going, your tactical brain was like, no, no, no. What about this? And so what was happening is, although, yes, the communication was faster, there was more communication than what was needed inside your own head going back and forth. And so you weren't actually as efficient as either in either space. And like I said, I had a sense of it. And since then, we've been watching it with some of our other clients, and we're seeing that that's a bigger deal. And I don't think people are talking about it very often. That this is actually a bigger deal than it sounds like, because often it feels like, well, I'm getting a CMO level person doing my content, so that means it's that much better. And that could be true, but that might not be true because of this kind of miscommunication back and forth within your own head. And at the same time, it's not something that necessarily that it makes sense or you can afford to do at the earliest stages. Sometimes having the one person, wear all the hats makes sense. So there was a whole lot of factors going on in there. And so part of it was our stage of business and what was happening. Part of it was me seeing something that I couldn't quite put my mind, put words to, more instinct based on just lots of experience. So it was an interesting thing. And I just kept thinking, should we be bringing someone else in to take over some aspects of it? Not all of it, but some aspects.
So I think that's a really good sort of like broad strokes of the situation. Because to your point, a lot of it I do think is intuition, right? As when you're a small team, it's not like you have this like long history that you can then point to, oh, in this set of circumstances, we were successful here, and in that set of circumstances, we weren't. I mean, most days there's just 3 of us on the team. So there isn't a lot to discuss. And it's very easy when you have a small team to assign positives and negatives with the individual and it being personality based than it to be job function based as well. I mean, that's something that you have taught me in the time that we've worked together, that you really have to divorce the role from the individual. And then that's when you get a sense of what makes sense for one person to do, is when you just look at it all written out on paper. Does it make sense for the same person to be in charge of all these things? So when we were talking about this, of course, there is a lot of things that are much more efficient, right? If it is one person end to end. I mean, we see this all the time with SaaS tools. Why have 5 subscriptions to 5 different tools if you can have one tool that does all the things?
Right.
Neither you nor I are high-level users, but I mean, that's the big selling point of really big, comprehensive tools like High Level is, it does your email marketing, your website, your text messaging, you name it, it does it. And then you've got one bill, you've got one customer service department to reach out to, and it's very seamless and streamlined. The flip side, you have one customer service department to reach out to, and if their customer service is subpar, you're kind of stuck, right? You have one potential failure point. And so if it fails, all your systems are down at the same time, right? And the same is true with a human, right? For me, doing the end-to-end marketing, if I had a big project that I was working on that required my full focus, other things didn't get done because I am only one person who can only do so many things at one time, right? So there were limitations there from the beginning that we saw, and we were making trades.
Right.
Where
it was choice, right? It was totally choices. So So I don't, not like, oh, this was a bad decision from the get-go, because it was not a bad decision from the get-go.
No. And I want to say, first of all, what we're going to be talking about here is true delegation. And true delegation is something that we dove deeply into in episode 4. So we'll put that in the show notes. So we won't spend a ton of time talking about what true delegation is. But Gwen, I want you to kind of give us your 2-sentence description of true delegation for people who aren't familiar with us.
So true delegation is a multi-phase process. And that's the first thing that most people don't get, is they think I've told you to do this thing, you know how to do this thing, so it's been delegated. Well, that's actually step 1, is to make sure that you've actually explained and handed off the particular task item, whatever the activity is, right? That's step 1. Step 2, though, phase 2 is where we really start looking at how are they doing it? Are they doing it and meeting expectations? Because what we're working toward in this multi-phase, and different levels of things have multiple phases. Some can do it in 2 and some take 5. So I'm not going to say how many phases it is. But what we're working toward is, do they have the responsibility and the decision authority about that task? That's when it's true delegation. Because if they come back to you and you still are the one that has to make the final choice, then it's never fully delegated. You've only delegated the activity, not the actual task, right? You delegated the doing.
Right.
But the responsibility piece, that you trust them to do it. And when they know that they've hit something that they actually are, it's kind of, I use the phrase above their pay grade, that's when they come to you. But they have the authority to make the choices, solve the problems. We expect that they're going to solve the problems, not just come to you every time there's a problem coming up, right? And that's a different level of delegation than what most people think of delegating. And so the reason most people get frustrated with delegating is it's like, I'm still spending all the time. Well, you're spending all the time because you're training them to keep coming back to you, instead of you saying, no, you've got this, and no, you have to have this.
Right. And just to be really clear, right, the reason that is a problem is if you are somebody who is hiring a team to provide help and you find yourself more overwhelmed after hiring a team than you were before, it's likely because this is exactly what you've done, is you have offloaded tasks, but you have not offloaded full responsibility for the completion of the task or the outcome of the tasks.
Right.
And that's the issue. So nothing has left your brain.
Right.
Nothing is off your shoulders. And so so going back in time a year, I remember when you would talk about, maybe we need to find somebody else to do the writing, part of it is I would get caught up in the how. It's like, okay, so how do I find somebody who does who understands the business model? Because I am not the first marketing professional you have hired. Okay, there is a very long and wieldy catacomb of ghosts of marketing past and their skeletons that we have, had to recover from in our working relationship. So part of it is, okay, it took you how long to find me, who took the time and the energy and the effort to fully understand your business model, what made sense, what didn't, to then understand what marketing approaches made sense and what didn't. And so when you would talk about find somebody else, I would think, I don't have time to find another me, Gwen. I don't. How long did it take you to find a me? Now you want me to go out and find another me? If I knew of other me's out there, I would bring them to the table. But where does that happen? Right? So that was the first thing, was going, well, first we have to have our messaging set. There's all these things that we need to have in line so we can very clearly communicate to somebody else that this isn't your everyday 5-step funnel. Right?
Right.
Then it was also okay, so not only do we have to find that, but then we also have to find somebody who has the understanding of your business, how you approach business. Because how many times have you or I met marketing professionals that when we talk about the way that you do business, they're like, oh, well, that doesn't work, or, oh, it's not like that. And we're like, but it is.
But it is.
Right? So it felt like we'd have to offload to a unicorn. And I was fresh out of unicorns at that moment. Then we were talking and we kept thinking, I kept saying, I like, Gwen, I just don't know who we'd come up with. And you would throw out some names, right? And we'd look on LinkedIn. You'd say, well, I know this, we're primarily on LinkedIn. I know this person does LinkedIn writing. Let's look at them. And what I ultimately came to terms with is, okay, everybody kind of does the same sort of writing. And we don't really want to sound like everybody else. So that's why these individuals aren't a good fit. And in exploring a little bit further, realize, okay, so everybody's going to need to be told what to write. So then I was able to write down my list of needs, right? Okay, so if we're going to offload these writing tasks, we need to find somebody who doesn't need to be told what to write at every turn. That doesn't mean that we were just like, hey, go write for us, right? Because we don't abdicate our responsibility
they were
here.
Going to need guidance for sure,
right?
On what it was going. But this was back to, I wanted you to wear your CMO hat,
right?
Which would be providing that guidance.
Mm-hmm.
But you were also saying, I need someone with enough experience that I can give them broad strokes and they can fill in all of the gaps.
Right. And so we found that person. Let's just cut to the chase. We found a person. And, when I reached out to them, they were somebody who I'd worked with before. And when I reached out to them, I said, okay, so I don't know if this is the kind of thing you do, but here's a need I have. And because I had been keeping notes of, we absolutely positively need this, we absolutely positively cannot have that, I was able to paint a really clear, accurate picture of what our need was, which is we need somebody to write LinkedIn content for us. And the person who writes the LinkedIn content for us absolutely positively cannot be just giving us a bunch of really bad copy-paste AI drivel. Okay, that's not okay. Like, this is who Gwen is. This is who she's not. She doesn't go off selling her sham wow. So I don't need any of that stuff. I don't need any complex funnel marketing because we don't have a complex funnel. It's very specific to the individual. Everything we do is rather bespoke. I mean, it is very boutique around here. And then really I had to be comfortable going, are you in or are you out?
Well, and so here's the other thing that I think it's really important when we start talking about delegation in this way is being really clear on what are the must-haves and or the must-have-nots as you describe them, and not getting so wound up about all of the other details. And what I find often as people are starting to offload, they get way more focused on the details and less focused on the critical aspects of it. It's a hard thing to do because we're used to thinking through all of the details. And it's like, no, if it's someone who's really skilled, they're going to do the details differently than you do the details. And so you need to not care about the details. What you need to care about are those critical skill elements, critical experience elements, critical behavior elements, whatever that set is, and focus on that. And if they have that, then the details will resolve themselves so long as you realize they're going to do it differently than you are.
Yep.
But that may also mean they do it better.
All right. So fast forward to now. How are you feeling about the content that we're putting out on LinkedIn? Which, by the way, dear listener, you need to know the content we put out on LinkedIn right now is a mix of Gwen's own writing and a mix of our copywriter.
So what I'm finding is two things. One is because I had gotten to a point where I had fully delegated marketing to you, from my perspective, as far as the effort, the result, overall, nothing has changed in any sort of negative way, right? Because I'm still seeing content post regularly. I'm watching, impressions and feedback and conversations. And so a lot of it feels the same, which to me is a win, because that means that you are able to release things in a way that that you're probably happy with. I know you are happy because we've talked about it, but that you weren't like, oh my God, I can't believe that's what just got posted on Gwen's LinkedIn, right? But on the other hand, we've also talked about results, and we're actually getting better results by having someone who's focusing on this.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, it's costing me about the same or less, even though technically I'm now paying you at a higher rate per hour.
Yep.
Right. So like, I feel like it's a win all around because you're getting similar pay, but having to put less hours in for it because we're really having you focus mostly on CMO work. We're getting as good or potentially better content as far as engagement and all of the other pieces. And then for you, one of the things that you've talked about is you now have a thought partner to be talking about marketing with. And so that allows you to actually do your job better as a CMO. Because this is the whole thing about, the service I provide is outside perspective, right? That's one of the services I provide is outside perspective. And so you're able to get outside perspective on the marketing piece, which you were never able to get before.
Right.
Right. So there's an additional bonus for you in being able to do that. But the key of all of this, and I think, is really the point of this, is trust. Right? That we have to be engaging people that we trust.
Right.
Now, and trust is such a funky thing, right? I mean, trust is one of those very weird things because you have to give it before you actually have it to figure out whether or not they should have it. Right? We give trust before that we can completely trust them because that's, you don't actually know that you can trust them until you've given them the fact. I mean, it's very chicken and eggy. I mean, it's a very weird little dynamic. That being said, if you break trust, getting it back is a whole different ball of wax, man.
Right. And I think everybody who struggles with delegation likely struggles with delegation because from their perspective, they tried to do it once and it blew up in their face.
Yes.
Right? Because
it could be their tiny T trauma delegation, right? I have tiny T trauma marketing. They have tiny T trauma delegation.
Exactly. And, and part of why this current relationship works is I had enough bad experiences to know what questions to ask in advance so that I could make sure that we were aligned. But part of it was also having worked with someone in enough different circumstances to be like, oh, this is probably the person that can handle the job that we're asking. Now, for us, so we started off with just a 1-month trial. I'm going to kind of walk through the steps because these are the steps to true delegation that you have laid out before, right? So the first thing we did is we met and we got aligned on what the ideal outcome was and got really clear in how much freedom they had and what the non-negotiables were, right? So they knew very clearly, to use a retail example, they knew very clearly that they had full authority to solve $10 problems, but only I had authority to solve $100 problems. And anything more bigger than a $100 problem, we'd have to go to you.
Right.
The other thing is I had to make sure that this was somebody who was willing to take the time and energy to listen to podcast episodes so that they understood your voice, your style, right? I didn't just say, go read our website. I gave them 6 or 7 different resources and said, hey, go check out this. And I need you to come to the table and ask me questions. Like what makes sense to you? What doesn't make sense to you? Right. So we had some dialogue and then I gave them an assignment, which was really 15 posts where I said, okay, I think we need to talk about our book club once. I want to talk about our, upcoming events that Gwen is doing. I want to talk about those 3 times. And then we've got a couple of offers that I want to be talking about 4 times. Okay, let me see what you've got with that. And then that allowed me to make sure that their understanding of what you did matched the reality of what you did. And while they were writing, they were coming back and asking me questions, which helped me understand their thought process. And then what I recognized very clearly on probably about 2 weeks in is that what I didn't know that I needed and was looking for was a puzzle piece. And we've talked about a puzzle piece before, but for some reason I hadn't quite connected the dots.
Right.
That I wasn't looking for another me and I wasn't looking for another you. Okay. We already have you in the organization, Gwen. We already have me. We don't need duplicates. What we needed was a third, contributor who brought an entirely different perspective, to your point. And we found that. And now,
I think,
go ahead.
That's one of the big places where I think people struggle with delegation, is because they're thinking of hiring a clone.
Mm-hmm.
They would never say that, because it's like, I'm the CEO. I don't want to hire another CEO. But yet they want someone who's thinking like they are, doing like they are. Back to the details will be exactly the same because they think exactly like I think and will approach it the exact same way I approach it.
Mm-hmm.
And in most cases, I'm sure there are exceptions to this, but in most cases, hiring a clone is your worst answer.
Yes.
You really want a puzzle piece, as you're describing. Somebody that's going to come in and fit, but add to the picture, right? And so they do need to fit like a puzzle piece, but we are expanding the picture as we add that puzzle piece. They can't be the puzzle piece that's way out over here and we don't have anything even close to connecting it to yet. They've got to be, in that next joining spot to be useful. And so that does make any particular delegation a bit of a unicorn hunt, but there's probably more puzzle pieces that fit than you think.
Right, because what you're really talking about is hiring for capability and judgment. And I'm just going to be direct here, right? Okay, so hiring for capability and judgment is not a $5 a day hire. It's not even a $5 an hour hire, right? It's not a $15 an hour hire. So I think that's part of the problem, is that we want to offload our responsibilities. And we'll just use easy math, right? We want to take our $100 brain and we want to replace it with somebody who we pay $10, $20 an hour to. And that's not easy to do these days. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm sure there is somebody listening who's like, well, I've got somebody who's 20 times better than me and I pay them $20 an hour. Yay for you. I have just not been successful in finding those individuals in my career. So we hire for capability, we hire for judgment, which I actually think is more important than skill execution, because I can train skill execution.
Right.
I can't train you to make solid in the moment judgments without my insight. That's something that you either need to bring to the table or not. What would you say to that, Gwen?
Behavior. Always hire for behavior first, because skills we can train. So behavior and attitude, you can't do anything about. I mean, technically, maybe you can, but usually not.
Right.
But skills, we can train skills. And part of it is, do we have time to train those skills? Now, in this case, I don't have time to train someone to teach them to write well. Right. So that's part of the skill I'm expecting you to bring in to this particular job, that you write well. But we could have made a choice to bring someone in who really had all of the right attitude and behavior. But we said, nope, we're going to train you on the skills. And knowing that would be not a 30-day trial, but it would be a 6-month trial or a year trial before we got them to where they needed to go. That's also a choice, not necessarily a bad choice, depending on what your time frame is. Because often those people you can really get to move into huge, super valuable places. But this is the thing I think most people are forgetting, is they get too wound up about the detail of the skills. And it's like, but do they have the behavior, which this, like you're talking about, making good judgments, being able to be decisive, willing to take an appropriate level of risk in making a decision, right? Being on time, doing all of those things. Those things are the more important things, so long as they have the base skill that you require. The rest of the skills we can train.
Right. And I think, what you're saying is really addressing how any business owner can figure out whether they're ready to hire or not. Because what I had to realize is that we weren't ready to do this until I had the words to articulate the outcome we were looking for without feeling like I also had to prescribe the exact steps to take to get to the outcome.
That is like, that's kind of the mic drop moment, right? Is you've got to be focused on the outcome, not the process to get within reason. We're all about systems and processes, so you can't, go off and run rogue and do all sorts of crazy things. But the detail about, do I step to the left and then to the right, or do I step to the right and then to the left? So long as that doesn't screw up anything else that's going on, I don't think it matters. So long as we're getting the same outcome.
Right. And I think that's the big red flag. So if you're listening and you find yourself feeling like you still need to control every step, or if you find yourself really uncomfortable, like not, oh, this pushes me a little outside of my comfort zone, but that's okay. But like genuinely uncomfortable, losing sleep, needing to like take an antacid over the idea of somebody doing it differently than how you do it, or approaching the situation differently than you, then you're not ready to delegate. And I mean, you would say, Gwen, that's okay. It's okay to not be ready.
Yeah. But don't think it's going to solve the problem. Don't say, yeah, I'm probably not ready, but I'm going to go ahead and do it because it'll solve the problem. No, it's not going to solve the problem. It will compound the problem.
Right. And what I found for myself was, so when you were asking me, how do we get things off your plate? I was very resistant to that. Part of it was, I don't want this.
I wish I would have had a picture to see your face, because it was definitely one of those. So you don't think I'm competent? And it was like, no.
Well, it wasn't even that, right? Here's what I had to reconcile within myself, right? And we're grown-ups, we can admit this. It's because I like it all, right? When you say, what can we take off your plate? I think all of us go to, well, what don't I want to do? Well, honestly, on any average day, I want to do all of it. I may not want to do all of it at the same time or all of it on the same day, but I like every aspect of my role. What I had to shift, though, was not so much, how do I get this off my plate? Because I liked it. Then you're asking me to give up things I like. But it was, how could we solve this better? Right? We're not quite getting the results we want. We're not quite getting the results we like. So how do we get better results? That was a really interesting problem to solve. That got me very excited, because then it was like, okay, well, who do I want to work with? Like, who do I want as a thought partner? Who do I know in the space, or maybe who can I ask for introductions that could help me solve this rather intriguing, juicy little problem? Because it feels like we're doing everything right, but something's not quite hitting. Who's that? That felt intriguing. And it felt like a challenge worth your time and energy. It felt like a challenge worth my time and energy versus, oh, I just want to offload these tasks.
Well, and that was the big piece of, it's not about you're not doing a good job. It's how do we allow you to do a better job, right? And I think that's the piece, and I'm the first person to acknowledge, so often people come in and say, oh, get rid of all your low level tasks. And it's like, some of those low level tasks you probably should be keeping, because they're providing you rest that is restful work. They are providing satisfaction. There's all sorts of things, but there also can be a time where that's no longer true. Tonya, you're gonna fall out of your chair, so I'm just gonna like warn you ahead of time, because you haven't heard me say this. I said this 2 times last week to other people, that I can now for the first time see that probably in the next 12 to 18 months, I'm gonna have to give up bookkeeping.
I just want to be said, folks, that it is 2025 in the year of our Lord that Gwen has committed to possibly in the next 6 to 12 months giving up bookkeeping.
Yeah. 12 to 18 months probably will be, because there's enough things changing in the business that although I love doing it and I'm good at it and I've got all of those things, that really won't make sense for me to do. But I really, truly only came to that in the last week or two, where I started thinking about the future. It's like, oh yeah, that's going to have to go. That's going to be one of the things that has to go. And it will be a harder delegation for me than some because I care about it. But I also know it'll be an easier delegation than some because I know exactly the pieces that are the important pieces.
Right. And I think it might be hard too, is because you're going to want to find somebody who loves it as much as you love it. And there are certain roles, I think it is important to find somebody who loves it as much as you love it. Like in the case for us with a writer, we really do need somebody who loves writing about the work we do and our clients as much as I love writing about the work we do and our clients, because they're really cool people, right? But maybe bookkeeping isn't an area where you just need somebody who is as good as you, if not better. They don't necessarily need to love it as much.
Yeah, one of the things that will matter is because I use profit first, I need someone who's going to get the profit first method and why I use it and not try to fight me, because there's extra steps that go in to leveraging profit first. And I can see someone saying, oh, but you don't need to do all that. Just do this. And it's like, right? So back to what are those critical elements? What are the ones that absolutely have to be there? The good news is there's lots of folks out there that know profit first. And so that's not going to be like, oh, and that means there's only 3 people on the entire planet. That's not going to be the case. But it's back to understanding what pieces are critical in the bookkeeping, and what pieces aren't critical in the bookkeeping. And so I think that's going to be, that's an example of, when I do it, I can't be like, you have to do it my way. Right? Because that's not going to make any sense. And there may be a few minor aspects of it that's like, no, I'm just going to handle this piece.
Okay. All right. So before we go, I want we're going to each do a question. What is a question that a CEO or a business owner could ask that reveals somebody's thinking ability versus their ability to complete a task, so that you know that you're hiring more of a thought partner or a puzzle piece than a clone?
So the first thing that popped into my head, so I'm going with that one, is giving them 2 or 3 true real life problems and asking them how they'd solve it.
Okay, get out of my head, Gwen Bortner. That was going to be mine. All right, we're just going to give you one then.
We didn't talk about this. I love that.
No, because I really think that's it. I think the problem is what we want to do is say, are you familiar with the profit first method? Check yes, check no. Have you done the profit first method with a service-based business before? Check yes, check no. Right? How many years of experience do you have with the profit first method? Right? And we want this person to say, well, I used to be a certified profit first professional, but I'm not anymore. Or, oh, I went to ProfitCon, for 3 years in a row and right? We want these experiences. And really what we need to be asking is your thought process. Walk me through how you solve this problem, and listen not for the steps they took to solve the problem, but does the thought process make sense? Because if the thought process makes sense, 90% of the time, they're going to do the right thing at the right time. Would you say anything different?
No, that's it. That's exactly it, is listening to how they think about solving the problem and the steps that they were willing to take. And I would also ask a question, what was one that you weren't able to solve and what did you do about that? Because that also helps you figure out what they see as their maximum level.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah. Like figuring out what's the ceiling, what's the floor,
or is it not high enough?
Yeah. What's the ceiling?
Or is it about where it needs to be?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I feel like this is a juicy episode with lots of tidbits. You might have to listen closely to get all of them, but we will sum them up in the show notes for you. So Gwen, thank you for allowing me to use us as a case study. I think we're the best case study out there because we don't have to worry about hurting our own feelings.
Oh, right. No, we're an awesome case study because who's going to get blamed but you or me?
Right, exactly. It works out really well for us. We didn't have to sign any disclosures. We're good. We're good. All right. And for our listener, true delegation, if you take away nothing else from this episode, is first of all to understand that true delegation isn't about finding a cheaper version of yourself. It's about finding or building a team of people who can bring their full capability to your shared mission and augment what you have in your organization already. Okay. So we're looking at supplementing, not supplanting. And when you hire thinking partners instead of task executors, understand that you're going to actually do more than get work off your plate. You're going to get better solutions, fresh perspectives, and the kind of support that really does allow you to be in a place to help your business grow beyond what you could be accomplishing alone. And if you are sitting in that seat right now and you're thinking that your team is creating more work for you than they solve, or if you're finding yourself constantly frustrated with how others handle your tasks, you might be stuck in this delegation pattern that's keeping you burned out. And you need our Breaking the Burnout Cycle assessment, because that is going to help you. Gwen has created this to help you identify whether your leadership approach is part of the problem that's driving you to burnout. So go to thebusinessyoureallywant.com/burnout, take the assessment, develop your action guide. We have all the steps there contained within the free guide, and that will help you take the next step to building the kind of team that actually supports your success. Gwen, thank you, and I will see you next time.
All right.
Thanks for tuning in to The Business You Really Want with Gwen Bortner. I'm Tonya Kubo, reminding you that sustainable success is within reach. Make sure to subscribe to the show and visit thebusinessyoureallywant.com for more resources. Until next time, keep dreaming big and acting with intention.